Hey everyone. Those of us who have faced or are currently facing conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID know that the fatigue and pain and all the other symptoms that can go along with these conditions are very real. They are not just in our heads, and no one knows this better than those of us who have gone through this. We have been poked and prodded and told your labs are normal more times than we can count. But the latest neuroscience is finally catching up to what we have known all along. These symptoms are real. And the best part? This research doesn't just validate our experience, it actually shows how we can resolve symptoms without maxing out our credit cards on miracle treatments or crazy diets or whatever supplements are trending this week. Right now, in this video, we're diving into groundbreaking research on pain and neuroplasticity, learning how the brain generates symptoms and how we can rewire it to break free from chronic conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. If you're new here, I'm Raelan Agle, and this is where we explore real recovery stories. No fluff, no censorship, just what actually works. And after interviewing over 200 people and counting who've reclaimed their health, I know one thing for sure. Recovery isn't rare. It is happening all of the time. And I couldn't be more excited to have Rebecca Tolin back with us today, joining us from beautiful San Diego, California, after overcoming 13 hard years of ME/CFS. Rebecca dove deep into mind-body science to understand why she got sick and how to get better. And right now, she's sharing with us the latest research on pain and fatigue. We'll talk about why fear fuels symptoms, why emotions matter, and how somatic tracking and pain reprocessing therapy can help turn things around. Rebecca, I couldn't possibly be more excited to have you back on the channel. Thank you for being here.
Oh, Raelan, it is so good to be back with you. I appreciate you and your work so much. You're just doing so much good in the world. So I love that we get to chat again.
But first, I'd like to thank Hers for sponsoring this video and helping me consistently bring you quality content at no cost to you. Hers is a solution and a safe and affordable way to gain access to a prescription weight loss treatment plan in the new year. I know I'm not alone in this. Over the years, I've yo-yoed with my weight. In my younger years, I've calorie counted, tried fad diets, and more recently, sometimes struggled to find time to prepare healthy meals or exercise regularly. I know that achieving and maintaining a healthy weight is a struggle for many people. Hers offers access to a range of weight loss treatment options personalized to your unique needs as determined appropriate by a healthcare provider. It starts with a free online consultation where a medical provider licensed in your state will review your health history and symptoms, then recommend a treatment that suits your needs. The process is simple and 100% online. If prescribed, your treatment could include quality-tested compounded GLP-1 injections or oral medication kits as part of a personalized weight loss plan based on your lifestyle, eating pattern, health history, and weight loss goals. You'll also get a weight loss program developed with industry specialists who have decades of experience with weight loss. And you'll have unlimited provider messaging included with your treatment plan. Hers fits your goals and your budget. You get ongoing care included at no extra cost if prescribed. There's no hidden fees, so don't wait for someday to start. Start today in the new year. Go to try-hers.com/Raelan to start your assessment with a medical provider who can help you explore weight loss medication options. You can also find the link in this video's description. And right back at you, I hear people talking about you on social media and in my Facebook group, and every single person has only amazing things to say about you as a person and the work that you are doing. And so many people cite you or even just the free information on your website as one of the key things that allowed them to recover. So you are definitely having an impact with the work that you do. Before we dive into all of that, I know you've shared your story on the channel before, but it's been quite a long time. I can link up here to your very first interview where we really go into it in depth. But for people who might not be aware of what you personally went through with this, because it was a lot, I know this is a big ask, but could you summarize that, the short version of it for people so they get a sense of what brought you here?
Absolutely. I've learned to sum up these 13 years with MECFS. So for me, they started after a really traumatic event. And after that, I got these three viruses and I had kind of the quintessential MECFS crash where I went from being this world traveling reporter to someone who could barely walk around my house. I just would lose words and language. I couldn't remember my best friend's name. I felt like I had the flu 24/7. Insomnia was terrible, and just a lot of the really classic ME/CFS symptoms. I went to 50 doctors and practitioners over the next weeks, months, and what turned into 13 years. And pretty quickly, I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, as well as Epstein-Barr syndrome, Lyme disease. And then when you go to enough functional medicine and naturopathic medicine doctors, you get a lot of other diagnoses like candida and leaky gut syndrome and adrenal exhaustion and all those things. And I really tried to follow the biomedical model and take things like antiviral medications, all the gazillion supplements that many of us have been on, the diets. I was eating just green vegetables and either fish or chicken for 3 years. I was still very bloated and constipated. And none of those things worked. And I actually would ebb and flow. But over those 13 years, I had to go on long-term disability. I couldn't work. I couldn't socialize much at all. Couldn't exercise. And eventually I ran out of money and desire to be in this biomedical maze that just wasn't helping. So I would say I fell into a state of acceptance and surrender. It wasn't complete resignation, but I really just started doing gentle yoga and meditation. And I would notice these things would help a little bit. And I started reading and writing poetry because I couldn't really read a book that had a lot of text due to the brain fog. And so through that, I happened to meet a woman in a poetry course who told me she recovered from ME/CFS. And I had never met anybody yet who had actually recovered. This was back in 2018. And I also wasn't online much because of the brain fog. So that was a light bulb moment. She told me about the work of John Sarno and Howard Schubiner. She told me that I could get well again. And I literally got up and ran around the block. I had not ran in 13 years, but that was the power of belief and feeling safe and hopeful in my body and mind. It wasn't the end of the story in terms of symptoms, but it was a completely new beginning.
Wow. Yeah, that was a really good job, Rebecca, summing that up. I know it was a really horrendous 13 years, and it can sound like almost nothing when we explain it now, but I know it was tough times.
Yeah.
So you get what the people who are out there still going through this are going through. And I can't believe how many people I talked to that one of Dr. John Sarno's books was the launching point for their recovery. So that's really incredible to hear. So now you do work with people who are facing these types of conditions. So maybe just start by telling us like a little bit about that. So what does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, once I recovered, I realized I had to spread the word. Probably like you can't hold this in. You want to tell everybody possible. But at that time, there really weren't the trainings that there are now. Now there's pain reprocessing therapy from Alan Gordon, Dr. Howard Schubiner's trainings. So I started just piecing together different trainings, mind body coach certifications. I did take Dr. Schubiner's practitioner training later, and actually early on studied with Alan Gordon and Howard Schubiner in person before they had really created these more sophisticated online programs. And pieced everything together and actually just started coaching people for free. I just wanted to see if I could help them. And one-on-one, people were starting to get better. But what I felt they were really missing was this whole download of knowledge that I got. I felt like people needed the knowledge and a set of practices to regulate their nervous system, process emotions, feel their somatic body, and all the things that had helped me. And I couldn't convey that just one-on-one. So I started doing group courses and developed a program that really helped educate people first with the science of what's actually happening, what's the root cause of these symptoms, and then different steps and practices to get well. And I've actually found that people largely do better in that format than just one-on-one. One-on-one work can be very therapeutic and important to work through some emotional trauma. But I think learning the brain science and the brain retraining is just pivotal.
Absolutely. Many people come close to fully recovering or see significant improvement. We call them book recoveries or video recoveries just by watching some videos or by reading a book. And I always, Nick from Australia, I'll be quoting him till I die, but he read one of Sorno's books and then went out and chopped down a tree after not being able to move for a really long time.
We worked together, and I can only say he was my client because he said that on your channel, or else I wouldn't say that. And he took my course as well. So I remember when he told me that, actually, when he said I chopped down the tree, and then yeah, and then also needed to do some deeper work as well. But
yes,
he has
most people share some moments, like you said, you ran around the block. It wasn't like that was it. Never look back, but it can really catapult things for you and get things going. And I did not remember that Nick was your client. That was a happy coincidence.
I love that you brought him up.
Oh my goodness. So you've learned so much, and absolutely understanding, I always say, educating yourself is step one. In this whole process of recovery, you need to understand the nature and origin and purpose of symptoms and how they're created in the body and how they're turned off to begin to move forward and start eliminating your own symptoms. And there are lots and lots of strategies to do that. But one thing I know that you would like to talk about, which I love, is that one of the things that people can really do to help themselves is actually to take a break from trying to fix themselves. So explain that, because that does, on the surface, sounds like it makes no sense. How am I going to get better? And then what, like magic? I just wait for it?
Right, just kind of wave my magic wand. Yeah. It's so counterintuitive. So exactly. If only it were like that.
Yeah.
On the first day of this course I teach, and also if I'm working one-on-one, I ask people to take a break from fixing themselves. Can you take a vacation from trying to fix a body you're perceiving as broken? And you just see kind of some deer in headlights and maybe some jaws drop. But I can't tell you how many people have actually told me that was a turning point for them, because they may have even had some of the knowledge and some of the practices, but they were going about their recovery with this very pushing, pressurized way of being, which is what we learn in our society. And that just revs up the nervous system. So when we're trying to fix something, it's continually subcommunicating to the brain and nervous system that there's something wrong with us. And when our subconscious brain thinks there's something wrong with us, it warns us through symptoms. That's the only way it has to communicate. And so you could be doing all the right things, but from this attitude of fighting, fearing, fixating, or fixing the symptoms, and you're really keeping your nervous system revved up. When you realize that these symptoms are generated in the brain and the nervous system because of perceived stress, you realize that there isn't actually anything pathologically wrong with your body. And of course, that is so counterintuitive when you're in bed and you're so sick. But the new science is really illuminating in that way. And so it's helpful to bring our language and our mindset into that space.
Yeah, I have one of my favorite books I've read on the topic is The Way Out by Alan Gordon. And I know you studied with him. He talks about this a lot. And this is one of the best things you can do for your recovery is to look for ways to start living again. Find those little things that bring you joy, because every time you do something that feels normal and makes you happy, puts a smile on your face, is sending messages of safety to your nervous system. And what a lot of this boils down to is messages of fear and messages of safety. And if you're coming at your recovery like a job, like a chore, something you're stressing over, something you have to get it done 100 times a day, then it's it's not going to have the intended result. So it feels so much of what we're expected to understand about recovery from these conditions is so counterintuitive based on what we've all been brought up learning,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like just to think, oh, go have fun and you're going to recover from debilitating symptoms that have left you
Yeah.
bedbound. It actually makes no sense at all. And it's counterintuitive in that if we have a physical injury or an illness like an acute virus, we do need to rest.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the remedy. But when it's perpetual and it's caused by the brain and nervous system, we really need to challenge ourselves. And as you say, to bring in lightness and play. And as Alan Gordon says, lean into positive sensations and experiences.
Yeah. And we have a lot of talk about emotions as well. I've found from a lot of people that I interview and just my own experience and reading is another seems overly simple, but just like feeling your emotions and acknowledging they're there and not solving every trauma or everything that's happened to you in your life, but just like giving it a little bit of space. So how is that? How's that played into your work with people and what has that looked like?
Yeah, I love that you brought this up. I'm really passionate about it. When I first read John Sarno's and Howard Schubner's work, and they were talking about repressed emotions being the cause of symptoms, it made no sense. I didn't get it at all. But then as I started doing these practices for myself and working with people, I realized that when I would hold in my anger, I would actually be more stressed. I wasn't even acknowledging that I was angry. When I would even try to push down fear to some extent without acknowledging that I'm scared, it would make me more anxious. Or when I would just ignore my sadness, it would bring me down further. And so, really, I see emotions as messengers. Emotions are actually there to signal some message to us. So, with anger, it might be that somebody's violating a boundary. It might be that in some ways our needs aren't getting met. And so, we want to actually listen to that, right? And see what the message is, if there is one. Sometimes it's just old neural pathways in the brain, but a lot of times there is a message, and really acknowledge that and see if we can act on it. Because if you think of like a temperamental child who's screaming and yelling and angry and upset, if you just say, oh, no, 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 don't get angry, just be happy all the time, what's that child going to do? They're going to act out more. And our primitive brain is the same. And so I have found that even a lot of people that have done great work with brain retraining and made a lot of progress feel that they're missing this piece of allowing the full expression and range of emotions. And I don't mean to take it out on other people, not to go punch that person in the face, but to find healthy ways, which could be punching a pillow, but different somatic practices, different breathwork practices, writing practices that help us really acknowledge the emotions that are there as signals.
I gave this example in another video, so if people watching this, if you've heard this, thank you for your patience with the repetition, but it was such an eye-opener for me. Have you watched the TV show Yellowstone?
No, I have not.
Okay. Would be better if you had, but that is okay. I can work with this.
I will
know
now, though.
I know many people have, and there's a character on there named Beth, and she's absolutely my favorite. And Beth is a really poorly functioning adult. She is like a temper tantruming 35-year-old. If she's angry, she screams. If she's mad at someone, she punches them in the face. Like and I'm like, I started to really reflect on why I loved her so much. And it just helped me realize, I'm like, because I'm jealous. I don't want to punch people, but I also like, I go through life with a smile on my face. Okay, and it helped me realize, like, I got some work to do here. Like, I'm not feeling my feelings. I'm not putting those boundaries in place. I'm not speaking up appropriately when, I'm angry about something. So it's just, I think a lot of us go through life being told that we should be a certain way. Men can't be sad, women can't be angry or assertive, all of these things. And it's shameful or wrong if we are, and we just push it down. And it's a really exhausting way to live, walking around holding up a facade that isn't how you actually feel. And obviously that's going to have an impact on our nervous system.
Oh, so well said. It's like we all need to channel our inner Beth, right?
Yeah.
And of course, we don't want to do it in a dysfunctional way. And there are really healthy ways to do it. But you're right, we don't learn that. And when we're holding in these emotions, it puts a lot of pressure and strain on our nervous system. And it's like this, glass of water. We hear so much about the allostatic load, and if it's building up and building up, and then you're also holding in all these really difficult emotions and you're not processing them in a safe way, that's adding to the load. And it can just sort of tip the scales where then you get chronic symptoms.
Yeah. So a lot has changed in recent years in the science behind all of this and our understanding of this. And so since you are so entrenched in this and working with the pioneers and the experts in this field, what are you seeing, or can you share some of what's come out recently that supports what we're speaking about as this approach to recovery?
Yeah, it's such an exciting time in this field, right? Because even back in 2018, when I recovered, there were really not the studies out that there are now. And so now there have been two prominent studies on chronic pain. You may have talked about them on this channel, but one of them, the Boulder back pain study, the other one out of Harvard University. And basically, both of them had really similar results using this mind-body approach, specifically that about 2/3 of back pain sufferers who had had years of chronic back pain recovered within the trial period, which in the case of the Harvard study, I believe was 13 weeks. In the case of Boulder was a month. So a really short period of time. There aren't medications or treatments that are that effective. And certainly they did a lot better. This approach did a lot better than the standard of care, which is typically cognitive behavioral therapy or just mindfulness by itself. And then there's a physician named Dr. Mike Donino who did the back study that ran a long COVID pilot study, and he recruited me to be a consultant on that. And those results, while small, it was only a sample of 23 people, were equally astounding in that about 2/3 of people felt they recovered. Specifically, I actually have some statistics here. There was 8 different somatic symptoms that were measured. So typical things that people have with long COVID: GI symptoms, fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, pain, shortness of breath. And they went down an average of 60% in just 13 weeks. And things like shortness of breath went down 80%. Brain fog decreased 67%. So these results are really exciting. And now Dr. Donino is actually doing a full-scale clinical trial, double-blind controlled study for long COVID. I believe he's doing one on migraines and some other neuroplastic disorders as well. So it's really exciting. There's a whole bunch of research in the pike. And I feel it's just a matter of time before this really becomes so undeniably proven that the medical community responds as well.
That is absolutely incredible. Because when you look at the billions of dollars that are going into research for long COVID, it just really, most of it is not coming up with virtually anything. And many people going to long COVID clinics, sometimes I wonder why the clinics even exist, because they're not really being given anything helpful other than maybe check out the CFS community. They might have something to offer. So that is amazing. And this is how, because ultimately we need the conventional medical system on board, and they become on board when we have these clinical trials and these publications that show empirically that this is working. So that is amazing. Absolutely incredible.
It really is. I mean, and one thing I find so interesting is I feel like right now it's still being spread grassroots. People like you, right? People like me that are just spreading the word because we didn't want to wait for another 10, 20, 30 years for this to become more the practice of medicine. But it is exciting. You're right. The studies are really what will change medical and scientific practice and understanding over time. And I really do believe we are on the cusp of a completely new paradigm. So it's like we thought the earth was flat and we realized it was round, or we thought the earth was the center of the universe instead of the sun. I feel like we are realizing that these symptoms that we feel in a very real way in the body that don't have a medically explained cause are generated by the brain and nervous system. And so they need a different treatment model than the biomedical model, which is treating the body part that is affected.
That is amazing. And it's wonderful to see also the humility of doctors and some people in the research community, that they are listening to patient stories and that these have weight and value. Because there's some frustration that many of us were feeling, understandably, like billions of dollars being put into this. Like, how come no one's asking the people who recovered? That seems like a really good place to start. I'm not sure if I've shared with you, I've been screaming it from the rooftops because I'm so excited, but there's researchers out of the University of London, Goldsmiths, who are doing a study on the interviews on my channel, which is really exciting, just to look at the recovery themes with the aim of publishing that in a medical journal. So
that is so exciting. I have heard of that, Raelan, and I love that, because it's like you've generated enough stories that there's data to draw from.
Yeah.
What are all the common threads here?
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, our voices, our stories, our experiences, like we all become experts on recovery by the time we get through this. So
Yeah,
it's good we're making use of that. When we're looking at the recovery stories on my channel, for a long time, the people in our community, myself included, we were trying like celery juice and all these different things. Oh my goodness, I remember the celery juice.
yeah. I was juicing with it every morning.
And then wheatgrass juice and 1,000 other things, trying to get well. And most people I talk to are not finding success with this. So why don't these things typically work with these conditions, like ME/CFS and long COVID, or at least the ones where we're looking at a mind-body syndrome, a neuroplastic condition?
I loved a recent video that you did. I can't remember the name. Maybe it was the Trident one, but where you were saying celery juice doesn't work. I was like, oh, yes. And so, and if it does work for someone, that's great. Of course, that's wonderful. Whatever works. But for those of us who have done all those supplements and diets, the reason it didn't work for me, and I believe it doesn't work for so many people, is because it's not a lack of celery juice that's causing our symptoms.
No.
Right? It's not that we're just eating one too many potatoes that's causing our symptoms. It's not that we were lacking these 35 different supplements that I used to take that's causing our symptoms. These are just guesses. They're like throwing paint at the well, but they're not getting to the root cause, because our body is actually not broken. It is where we feel very, very real physical symptoms. Our brain isn't broken either. Our brain and nervous system are just responding to a sense of heightened stress and threat, and haven't been able to keep up with the stressors that they've been facing. And then, of course, we get stuck in these stress symptom loops where our brain learns these patterns, and it specifically learns patterns of avoidance. So many of us were told to pace, and I remember specifically being told, your adrenals are in such bad shape. If you do too much, you're going to ruin your adrenals for life. Basically, the doctor said I would destroy my adrenals. It was so terrifying. And so I was completely afraid to move out of my little bubble. And when I would experience any symptoms, I thought that meant I went too far. But what that was doing for 13 years was training my brain that nothing outside of that bubble was safe. And so we want to retrain our brain through the activity by understanding that our bodies and our brains just need to learn a sense of safety again, reestablish that felt sense in our body, and essentially relearn how to do activities with this mindful, curious attitude where we're watching the symptoms instead of fighting them. And that's not easy, but somatic tracking and Alan Gordon's work has helped me so much with that. And I've seen that really be a missing piece for a lot of people.
Yeah, because we talk about rewiring our brains so that we feel safe doing activities. So we no longer equate sitting up too long or standing or going out the front door or going to the shopping mall as something dangerous that's going to cause us problems. But we're also realizing that it's our fear around symptoms and our reaction to symptoms can create that symptom spiral as well.
Yeah.
But it's a challenging thing to ask somebody to be happy about their symptoms. I know it's not happy, but if you could speak to a little bit about that. So what is that connection with fear and symptoms, and how can people go about this in a way when, because symptoms truly are scary or can be. So how do they navigate that?
Yeah, I love this question so much because it is really important first to understand that fear can be fuel for chronic symptoms because essentially our brain and nervous system, and it's our subconscious brain, are just picking up on the fact that there's a threat. And that's what fear signals. So while that's important, I've noticed that then what a lot of people do is instead of making the symptoms the enemy, they now make the fear the enemy. Instead of fighting the symptoms, they start fighting fear, right? And so that's why I ask people, can you take a vacation from fixing yourself? Because fixing and fighting and all those things tend to rev up fear. So for me, what I had to do was the exact opposite of what I had been doing when I would feel scared of the symptoms, which was always pretty much almost all of the time, I would just start to acknowledge it. I would say, I'm feeling scared instead of just, it's okay, I'm safe, which also when you learn this approach, you might start some affirmations, which could be helpful. But if you don't really feel it and you're just saying, I'm safe, it actually can be a lot more effective just to say, I'm scared. A part of me is scared right now. And I know that because I have symptoms. And then you might be able to get in touch with this felt sense of fear in your body and tune in and just ask, what does this fear need to feel safer? It might need to be heard. It might need some expressive writing. It might need, depending on your physical state, some more vigorous activity. It might need gentle meditation or breath work. But being in a two-way conversation with our body and our symptoms is a lot more harmonious and effective than just sort of barking these orders at our emotions or our symptoms, which I'm only saying that because I've been there for many years and I know what that's like. And I know what it's like to enter into a more just peaceful relationship with the emotions and the sensations.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to choose words that resonate for you. Like I have a online course as well. Well, not as well. You have a very in-depth course, but I have a self-study online course for brain retraining. And we talk about how suggested phrases or things that you can say, like I am safe, my body is fine. But if you're saying those and it doesn't feel true, exactly to what you're saying, like that's a reflection point. This isn't, a type of meditation where you're just repeating a mantra. It's about thinking and thoughts and unpacking what's there. And maybe those words don't even make sense to you. Maybe it's, I'm scared, but I know my body's okay. Or, like just finding what fits for you. So I interviewed someone recently who was saying also, the one who went to his doctor and I was telling you about before, who told him right away, oh, it's your brain, it's your nervous system. I'm like, wow, how did you get this information from a doctor? Because doctors typically aren't taught this yet. But you also have to be careful with that. So even when your doctor has the right approach, he walked away from that thinking he had to hide his condition from everyone and he could never speak about symptoms again and couldn't give it any attention because that was going to give them fuel. And it became this shameful secret that he was hiding from the world. And so I just think it's really important to take in as many different sources of information as you can so you can hear things explained many different ways and then be your own expert and trust your gut and pull out and customize and do what works for you. Because I think we used to think of this as like you join a specific program. They give you the magic words to say and the movements to do, and you have to follow it to the letter and then you're better. Everyone I interview tells me that for the most part, it's more of a like, yes, I took this program and adapted a couple things, or I took this from there and that didn't resonate, so I left it on the shelf. But just trusting yourself.
Oh, I love this point. I love so many points you just said. I'll like follow up on all of them because I think ultimately we feel safe when we're empowered and we feel safe when we're authentic. So if we're just following orders from a doctor and we're resenting this particular diet or whatever, that's really not creating a healing state. It also doesn't create this place of personal agency and empowerment, which is a key part of healing. Gabor Mate talks about that a lot in his work. And so, what I found and what I say is don't just listen to what I'm saying, just see what resonates with you. And really, to me, healing is about learning to attune to yourself, learning the language of your nervous system, the language of your emotions, what makes you tick, what you truly need, and learning to meet those needs. Really learning to meet those needs. And that might be different than what I say or even another practitioner says, but it's really coming from your own place of truth. And that's a big ask, right? It's still a journey that I'm on, but it was a core part of my recovery. And I would say that it just makes life so much richer when you're coming from this lens of, what am I feeling and what do I actually need right now?
Yeah. I'm thinking about when I finally found a doctor that helped me. He was an integrative medicine doctor, and he gave me really sort of detailed, complicated protocols, and I followed them to the letter. And I took so much pride in that. I'm like, I am such a good patient. I'm doing every single thing you tell me to do. I'm checking every box every day if it kills me, because I am disciplined and I am determined to get past this. And we've been brought up to think that way, that we should just do what we've been told to the letter without questioning it. And many of us, as we see, there's different personality traits that can lead us into it, one of them being perfectionism. And I'm reading this book called, I think, The Perfectionist's Guide to Imperfection. The author talks about, I can link it if people want to check it out, the difference between discipline and obedience. So it's important to have discipline. Like, I'm going to work out on the days even when I'm feeling lazy or I'd rather just watch TV. But if I'm genuinely tired or not feeling well, but I'm going to go anyways because my trainer thinks I should, or I think I should, or society tells me, that's just obedience. So it's unlearning a lot of these a lot of the personality traits that get us into this. We really have to unpack and be aware of as we're navigating our recovery, because if we take that same approach, for some of us, it'll slow us down.
Yeah. I've got to pick up that book because I'm definitely still on the recovery and perfectionism wagon. But that is one reason that somatic tracking and just other somatic meditations help me, because I started becoming really aware of my intuition in my body. So when you feel so crummy and everything hurts, it can be a little bit harder to parse out the symptoms from the emotions, from your intuition, but we all have it built in. And with a little more intimacy with an awareness with our felt experience, I find that we just know, we're drawn to something or we're repelled from something. We might be getting those butterflies in our stomach because we're excited, or we might be getting it because it's like, no, I really don't want to do that thing. So learning to honor that's really important. And it is part of the antidote to the personality traits. Specifically, I would say self-compassion has been huge for me, and I would say almost everybody I work with say that is like a missing element in just being a balm for the perfectionism, the pushing, the people pleasing, the pressure, and these coping strategies that many of us have adapted over the years.
You've mentioned somatic tracking a couple of times. Now, I know some people will be aware of this, but I imagine many people do not know what that involves. So can you give us an overview of what does it mean to do somatic tracking?
Yeah, that's true. I'm such a poster child for somatic tracking. And I'll just say, like any of the tools we're talking about, it may or may not be for you. With somatic tracking, basically, we're learning to watch the sensations in our body through a lens of safety and even curiosity, which sounds totally ridiculous at first. But instead of just saying, I'm exhausted, I started really noticing heaviness in my body. And then when I would bring my awareness into the area where there was most heaviness, sometimes it was all over, I would notice burning and I would notice tingling or pulsing. And so really just tracking those sensations in this mindful, curious way sub-communicates back to the subconscious brain that actually I'm picking up on your signals. I'm not ignoring them. You're trying to tell me I'm not safe and I'm picking up on them. But through my attention and awareness, and even sometimes through certain mantras, I'm communicating back, I got this, I'm okay. Mm-hmm. And it's just a lot more powerful when it's both cognitive and somatic. So for me, when I was in this kind of active recovery phase over many months, I was doing a lot of somatic tracking, and sometimes the symptoms would just stay the same. And that was fine because outcome independence is a big part of somatic tracking, not trying to get the symptoms to go away. But sometimes they would actually shift into an emotion, like this heat. I would have this just terrible burning all through my brain and my limbs. I felt like everything was just burning up. And it would actually shift into anger. And I could feel the anger almost come up and out in this cloud. And sometimes it would be associated with a memory, and sometimes it wouldn't. But I would just feel this release. It's akin to when you have a good cry and you feel better. This can also happen with somatic tracking. You can also track emotions in your body. But I would say for most people, it's not helpful to do when you have really strong symptoms. So when the sensations are, I don't know, above a 4 or so on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be too intense to just bring your body into that. If you have a migraine, you probably don't want to do somatic tracking. But you could do it with a little bit of anxiety in your stomach, or you could do it with the fatigue or whatever it is. And it really is a very powerful tool to retrain your brain and also just reconnect with your body in the safe way.
And we're talking a lot about our thoughts and we're talking about emotions. And I know that you speak that or explain that it's important to distinguish between thoughts and emotions. So tell us about that.
Definitely. Because, a lot of times we'll say something like, I feel like I'll never recover, or I feel like I'm broken. And I get what that's like. I know you get what that's like, Raelan. But actually, that's not a feeling, it's a thought. I will never recover. I'm broken. And our thoughts do inform our subconscious brain. It's listening as to whether we're safe or not safe. And they also just trigger emotions, right? So if you keep saying, I'll never recover, just notice how that's making you feel emotionally. And one thing we know about these symptoms is emotions can be signals or cues for symptoms because they can trigger the autonomic nervous system. And then notice what a more supportive thought would be. I might recover. Other people have recovered. I'm on the right track. I'm watching Raelan's channel. I accept and love myself as I am right now anyway. Just whatever it is, it can be so helpful to start checking your language and really tuning into what feels unsupportive and how does that actually impact your physiology and what feels more supportive. And so that is different than emotions, which we just want to honor in the way I teach this. When emotions are present, we don't want to push them down because they're already manifesting in our body. And we feel them, often in our gut or our heart or throat or face are common places that we feel emotions. And so we want to feel them. You can use somatic tracking, or you could just do some deep breathing or some writing, whatever works for you. But you also really want to pay attention to your thoughts because they will continue to perpetuate the same emotions and the same symptoms in this loop if they're not supportive to you. And you deserve to have that supportive language, right? Like what you're going through is Herculean. It's the hardest thing I've ever been through in my life. And you deserve kindness, you deserve care and compassion. And you're the first person that can give that to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I've just finished another really great book. If this is resonating and they're looking for information, it's called The Happiness Trap. Again, I can't recall the author, but I'll link it. And there's an audiobook if you have trouble reading, but it really walks you through simple, concrete strategies to help you distinguish between thoughts and emotions and just what to do with these thoughts. Because it's the nature of our brain that we're going to have these thoughts. So trying to stop them, it's never going to happen. You're always going to have these, I'm a loser. Why am I so terrible at this days? And I'm going to be sick for the rest of my life day. Like you're never going to stop hearing those voices in your head. So it's giving you strategies of like what to do in that moment, like all these different, simple things that are really powerful, how to catch them. You can name it. You can repeat it back in a funny accent. You can sing it to the tone of happy birthday, like just things to remind yourself. It's just a thought. I notice you, you're there. All right, move along.
Oh God, it's really so many of those too, because they acknowledge it, but they bring some lightness in. And it also creates that buffer. Like you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, but they're just things things passing through your mind. And yeah, we don't want to beat ourselves up for beating ourselves up. We just want to become aware. Laughing at them's great. I sometimes would name my kind of doomsday story just some name like, oh, there's my doomsday story, or there's bananas again,
Yes.
or just some kind of goofy name.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And most of them are on repeat. We hear them 1,000 times. So we're like, okay, yeah, there's that story again. I see you. Hello. Oh,
I've got
yeah.
this.
Yeah. Instead of just getting hooked by it and, really, really
Yes.
ruminating. We talked about perfectionism a little bit, about how it can impact our nervous system. But what have you noticed, or what can you share just overall about personality traits that generally can impact how our nervous system functions?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people have that book cure. It may not be long lasting with John Sarno's work, in part because he explains the TMS personality, and people recognize themselves in that. I also really love the work of Gabor Mate, who talks about personality traits as coping mechanisms. And really, we can see that we develop them in childhood to try to generally avoid punishment or receive approval. So maybe you grew up in a family that had really high standards for you and was always asking for more. It could have been that you had very loving parents, but you always had to try harder and strive harder to get approval. And so you would develop perfectionism as a strategy to get that love from your parents. Or if you were told things like boys don't cry, or nice girls don't act out, you might become a people pleaser and just really hold in your authentic truth. And of course, we have to do some of that just to function in society. But it's important to at least acknowledge it to ourselves. And that's been a big pivot for me, is acknowledging I'm actually really pissed off about this. This is infuriating. This is frustrating. This is really sad. My heart's broken over this. And sometimes you can't even feel it at first, but you're just sort of acknowledging it, which goes back to the emotional piece. And so I think that can be part of the remedy for these personality traits. Again, we're not trying to totally change who we are or get rid of these things, because actually they have a lot of benefits, right? When we have really high standards, there's a lot of benefits for us and other people. But I like to look at, when does it tip into feeling bad? So it's like you were mentioning, I think, the obedience and the discipline. And I also think of excellence or refinement versus perfectionism. When I'm striving for excellence, it feels good. And it's something I want to do just because, I want to really write this blog in a creative way or whatever. But then when I start feeling really tense and I'm driving myself and I'm just working far too long and my eyes are bleary and my breath is shallow, it's completely tipped into this personality trait of perfectionism. It doesn't feel good anymore. So then for me, it can be helpful just to acknowledge, oh, perfectionism's here. Thank you, inner perfectionist. But I accept you anyway. I accept you how you are. You don't have to prove yourself to me. And you could bring lightness. You could just bring some awareness, take a little break from the computer, whatever it is. And over time, I've found they soften. They soften enough so the chronic symptoms resolve. I can say I've perfected getting rid of perfectionism. Not that that's my goal, but it's definitely still ongoing. But we don't have to live with the chronic symptoms. We can just live with more awareness and more compassion that this is a messy life. We're messy humans. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to make everyone happy. And how can we actually try to please the one person we have a shot of making happy, which is ourselves? And that's just by being true to ourselves and honoring our needs, our deeper needs.
Yeah, my understanding is, and what I see in virtually everyone I talk to, is all of these things come down to what that voice inside your head is saying while you're doing these things. And it helps you figure out where it's coming from, whether it's people pleasing or perfectionism, or, like I think, I started running again, and I thought, I want to run a marathon. I should run a marathon. And I thought, where is this coming from? Why do I want to run it? And the things that were coming up were things like, anyone who calls themselves a runner has to have run a marathon, and to be worthy as a human, you need to have that box checked. And I'm like, oh my goodness, none of this is good. And so it was just a really critical voice in my head saying, you're not worthy, you're not safe, you're not okay unless you get this under your belt. So I'm like, okay, that's not for me.
Oh, that reminds me of someone else I was just interviewing actually for my channel who was saying she thought in order to say she was fully recovered, she had to run a half marathon. And so she ran a half marathon. She was able to do it. And she's like, I hate this. This is rubbish. It feels terrible. I could do it, but I don't actually enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I think it's realizing what you enjoy matters.
Where is it coming from? And what are you saying to yourself about it? And because there are a ton of marathon runners that I interview that get CFS, but there's also a ton of marathon runners out there that don't get it. So what is driving you to do that activity? And I think that's easier to see and break down and see the fear component. But I don't know if you're aware of Cory Muscara. He's an ex-monk, now a positive psychology professor that I've become a little bit obsessed with. But he talks about people pleasing, and we see a lot of people pleasing as a theme in these conditions. Yeah. And he breaks it down also as a fear response because it is scary to set boundaries. It feels safer in the moment for me to just make you happy, for me to do this the way you want to do it, for me to say yes to whatever you're asking. And it feels unsafe to say no and to set my own boundaries. But long-term people pleasing creates all sorts of problems for us that are even more fearful, because then we're stressed and we're not taking care of ourselves and we're resentful and, exhausted. So it's just, a lot of it coming down to fear and that voice, whatever you hear in your head as you're going through these actions.
Right. And that really sort of shows us why we would people please, because sometimes we could beat ourselves up, right? For like, oh, why didn't I speak my truth? But it doesn't feel safe, right? And it partly doesn't because, of course, we just want to please the other person, but we have this history, and probably there was some modeling in our family of origin, or certainly in the culture that taught us that. And so it's bringing this awareness, it's shifting these patterns into ways that actually resonate with our authentic self.
So I could keep you here literally all day. Oh my goodness. There's so many more things that I want to dive into, but I know viewers, listeners, I hear you when you tell me that we need to keep these videos shorter. But I'd love to, before we wrap up, just hear more about the work that you're doing with clients, because I know people now will be very interested in learning more about what kind of support you have. So what is it that you do? If someone wanted to start working with you, what would that look like?
Yeah. So I teach a course called Be Your Own Medicine, and I teach it as a live cohort, usually several times a year, where I'm teaching it live and we have a whole coaching team answering questions and different opportunities to interact with people. But I also have Be Your Own Medicine as a self-paced course where people can study on their own, and it's really the same curriculum. And it weaves together this new brain science paradigm as it relates to ME/CFS, long COVID, POTS, and some of these conditions we don't hear about as much in the chronic pain community. It really presents the science. It presents step-by-step practices to reconnect with your body, to process these emotions we've been talking about, to cultivate self-compassion, to really find your own voice and your own way forward in the world. And so within the context of that program, I do some one-on-one coaching. I do find that it's just more effective when people are in the program. And generally the one-on-one coaching is more kind of going into the body, feeling some of the emotions, also just seeing where people are stuck, because we all have our own blind spots. And they can learn all about that on my website is the best place. There's also just a free meditation. We've been talking so much about somatic tracking, and I have a free one on my website if anybody wants to give it a try.
That is amazing. All of this, of course, linked in the description. I'm sure people will be checking it out. I'm also going to link here your earlier interview on the channel, which is also a wealth of information and insight and strategies and ideas. So just so much great stuff there. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for being here. I adore you. You are doing such great work. And I just appreciate you so much.
Oh, well, I adore you, Raelan. Thank you.
And I'm so excited. I want to let everybody know, Rebecca, that you are going to be joining my Facebook group for a live Q&A session. So if you're watching or listening and you would love the opportunity to learn more from Rebecca and get to ask her questions in real time, then take a look at the description for this episode and you will find out the date and the details for how you can join that. And in the description, if you expand it and take a look, you'll also find a link for Rebecca's incredible Be Your Own Medicine course. So if you're interested in that, you can click on that to learn more. And thank you to people watching and listening. We absolutely adore you too. And hope to see you in this next video with Rebecca.